So today I'm going to answer the question why edit distance actually works and why it can be a precise way of measuring effort. And I'm going to start just by saying flat out, it doesn't necessarily work. Edit distance is just a way for people to measure translation effort, whether it's accurate, whether it's reliable, whether it's precise, whether it's well structured. That's an entirely different question. But I want to touch on today on user behavior and edit distance and their direct correlation. Let's say let's take a step back. As a translator, if I'm working with edit distance, that means that I'm getting something that has either been machine translated previously and is being sent to me as a machine translated draft, or I'm working with an engine like BureauWorks context sensitive translation that's providing me with feeds runtime that are adapting to my changes, right? But nonetheless, I'm getting something from the machine, and then I'm changing it, I'm making it mine, right? That delta between what I got and what I put out, that's the edit distance. Now, let's suppose I am a linguist purist and I get a feed from the engine and I dispose it, I delete it, and I write it again from scratch. And I do this every single time. I'm looking at a segment, I delete it and I rewrite it. I delete it and I rewrite it. I delete it and I rewrite it. Chances are that if I'm paid by edit distance, depending on how people are arranging that framework, maybe I'm going to be handsomely paid for my efforts because maybe the structure really incentivizes me to make changes. Maybe I'm going to be harshly penalized for not leveraging the content that's being offered to me, right? On the other hand, let's say I'm doing the exact opposite. I'm just getting the feed and I'm confirming it, getting the feed and I'm confirming it. Maybe I'm just changing, very minor cosmetic things here and there. Maybe I'm changing just the tense of a verb, or I'm changing a synonym for another synonym. Maybe it's going to work for me, maybe it's not. Because ultimately, edit distance is measuring that delta, right? What I got and what turned out. Now, beneath the edit distance is the framework, the payment framework. And the payment framework is going to say, whether maybe for not changing anything, I'm going to make 30% of my rate, and maybe for making a few changes, I'm going to get 70% of my rate for that given segment. So when you talk about this, there's a big discrepancy, right? Because the same edit distance, right? Think about this. The same edit distance could represent completely different outcomes from a pay perspective, depending on this financial framework. So to say that edit distances work would be, in my opinion, a lie. It's the edit distances could be really representative of effort and could work if you're working with users who have been accustomed to using and leveraging this technology, whose efforts you can measure through statistical perspectives. And when you can prove, for instance, that through this mechanism, they are being able to match or exceed their expected income from an hourly basis perspective. So what do I mean by this? Let's say someone used to make $100 an hour. And let's say that on average, that same person can go through, let's say, on average, maybe 200 segments. No, that's way too much. Let's suppose they're making 200, they can go through 200 segments in that same hour, right? Now, let's say that the edit distance comes down to, for those 200 segments, they approved maybe 50% of them without any kinds of changes. They made a few minor changes here and there. Turns out that their pay now, if you process it through the edit distance algorithm plus the financial framework that you've established, maybe now they're making $105 an hour. That's not a terrible outcome, right? They're making, from an hourly perspective, even if they're paid by edit distance, it's kind of matching their previous expectation for income. Now, let's say they're using the same framework, but now instead of making $100 an hour, they're making $50. Obviously, there's a problem, right? Because now that same technology that is being, in theory, used to make them more efficient is actually being used to make them earn less. So there's a very big difference. Like, these things are completely non-synonymous. You can be more efficient and make more, or you could be more efficient and make less. So technological efficiency doesn't equate to making less or to the trade being worth less, right? What it does equate is it just opens the door for people to structure financial arrangements in ways that were previously unseen. Think about, for instance, word counts, right? Right now, anybody can go into a word processor and count the number of words in the file. It's really accessible to anybody. It's not a word processor. You can copy and paste it into some engine, and you can ask for word count. There are multiple ways for you to get word counts. If we go back to the age of typewriters, it was really hard to count words. So people measured blocks, larger blocks of text, like a page, like a paragraph, like a LADA. People would measure text differently, right? So those measurements have been changing through time. And if you take that even previously to parchments and scripts, the payment methodologies have been changing ever since the dawn of commerce and trade, right? We're continuously adapting to this. Now, we're in a space that's changing very quickly in a very short amount of time, which creates quite a bit of turmoil and confusion. And when we talk about pay, that's where, in my opinion, the turmoil and confusion resides. Because this technological shift, it favors certain kinds of user behaviors, and it rewards those user behaviors, and it punishes or doesn't reward other kinds of human behaviors. Again, going back to my earlier example, if I'm a translator who's continuously rewriting every single sentence, maybe this paradigm won't work for me, because maybe that's not what's expected of me anymore. Maybe good enough is what people are looking for. So there's a challenge, right? And I'm not saying that it's necessarily one way or another. Maybe it's the opposite, right? Maybe we need people who are just completely against edit distance and machine translation and are rewording everything from scratch. I'm open to a world where there's room for everybody. But I do see that there are always certain mainstream tendencies that can be identified. The mainstream tendency is that there's a lot of content that doesn't get translated because it's too expensive. There's a lot of pressure to make translation less expensive because that's the way the market grows. If you can make a product available in more countries, or if you can make more product lines available in more countries, you're more likely to increase return to shareholders in those organizations. Every organization that's for profit in the world is structured to maximize the return to shareholder. So there is pressure to do more for less. That's just the nature of the translation market. And within that pressure, that pressure goes downstream, and it gets consolidated in, okay, how do we pay people for this more for less? And the payment is completely tied to the work methodology. Now, the part of the challenge is that we have translators that began translating last year. We have translators who began translating 60 years ago, 70 years ago. There's a huge divide as far as generations and age spans of amazing translators out there. Some, like my mother, began translating on their typewriter. Others already did their very first translation in a computer-assisted translation environment. So there's a very wide range of translators out there who paid expensive tuition to go to translation school and to be trained on techniques and methods. And think about it, when you become very well versed in a tool or a trade over 10, 20, 30, 40 years, it's very, very hard to change. So I think it's very important to appreciate just how difficult it is for people to be able to recraft or re-engineer how they work with text. So I don't minimize the problem at all. I'm trying to frame the problem in a way that's understandable for people who are outside the industry and for those who are inside, so that they can try to better position themselves as far as their talents they need, as far as how they can restructure their work, as far as how they can rethink what it is they offer and how they offer it. So again, far from edit distance being a cure for all, a panacea, nothing like that. It's just a way to measure work, just like hours are another way of measuring labor. It does have some benefits, it does have some downsides, but I ultimately think that the problem resides around the financial frameworks used to translate the edit distance into payment methodologies and the user behavior associated to those edit distances. But those are just my opinions. Would love to hear yours in the comments. Please leave them below. Remember to like and subscribe if you like this video. Till next time.